That's right. All right. So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a number of people that are still connecting, and so we're going to give everyone the time to join. I see lots of friends and familiar names, and so thank you so much for joining us this evening. Go ahead, as you join, use the chat feature. Share with us your name, what locality you're joining us from. This is very strategic and intentional, and we'll share with you towards the end of the program why we're asking you to share with us your locality. All right, we are right at 6:01, and so I do want to be respectful of everyone's time, and we have a lot of content to cover this evening, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Tracy DeShazer, Deputy Secretary of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and I serve as the Governor's Director of African American Outreach. So happy Black History Month. What better way to kick it off than to lean into service? And so we're so glad that you're able to join us tonight for this very important conversation, understanding how to seek a statewide board or commission appointment. Again, in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and get started, and I promise we will conclude promptly at 7:15 p.m. We first just want to get into just a little bit of housekeeping. We ask that you utilize the chat feature to join in the conversation. So again, let us know who you are. Let us know what locality you're joining us from tonight. We want to engage with you. Next, be sure to select all attendees when engaging in chat so all call participants can see your questions and your commentary. I know it's very easy to get in that chat, but guess what? You're messaging me directly. And so make sure you select all attendees so that everyone sees your questions and your commentary. Remember that your hosts are moderating, so we may not be able to chat back with you this evening in real time. You would be surprised. Sometimes we get a lot of messages during these conversations, but we can't always stop what we're doing to respond directly. And so please just bear that in mind when you are messaging us. We encourage you to have a pen and paper or your computer or smartphone, iPad, tablet nearby so that you can take notes tonight. And then as we approach the Q&A portion of the program, just ensure that your audio and your video are connected so we can properly invite you into the discussion. Given time, we may be able to bring some people up on the screen to elevate their questions. And then next, we do want you to minimize as much background noise as possible. We understand that some of us may be at home. We have a few coworkers with us, and that's certainly okay. But feel free to go ahead and minimize as much background noise as you're able to. And then lastly, we want you to keep in mind that the full attendee list is private. So trust us, you're not the only person on the call, okay? But we recognize you can't see everybody else. And so know that you can feel free to engage in that chat. You can send it to all panelists, all attendees. We will see your questions and your commentary, so no worries at all. Depending on what version of WebEx you have downloaded, you may see different features. I promise everyone's settings are the same on the back end, but it really just depends on the type of device you're using and what version of WebEx you're using as well. And then next, we just want to remind you to lean into service. There are opportunities for everyone to serve. As we kick things off this evening, we just want to remind you that service really is a tremendous opportunity. And so we really want you to sit back and have a good time as we engage in the discussion. It's now my pleasure to introduce you to the Secretary of the Commonwealth, Kelly Thomason. Secretary Thomason is going to speak with you all about the importance of board service.
Good evening, everybody. Tracy, thank you so much, and thank you for putting together this awesome opportunity. We're thrilled to have so many people from all parts of the Commonwealth joining us tonight. This is what we do. This is what we live for, is reaching out to folks in the community, making sure you know about these opportunities to serve. As Tracy said, there's no better way to honor Black History Month than to engage in service. And so really appreciate you all being here tonight to learn about some of these opportunities. So first, I'm going to start with just a real quick overview of the Office of the Secretary of the Commonwealth, because if you are like most people, you have no idea what we do. The title is not really helpful in helping you determine that, right? If our friends from Secretary of Education's office or Secretary of Agriculture were here, our friend Ryant Washington, who's going to join us later, used to be with the Secretary of Public Safety. You can guess some of the work that they do. Secretary of the Commonwealth sounds a little bit more broad. That's because our work is. We do a little bit of everything. One of the things that we do that we're thrilled to talk to you about tonight is, on behalf of the governor, make appointments to all of the state boards and commissions. We're going to dive into that, but that's just one piece of what we do. Tracy and I are also working on clemency and restoration of rights and service of process and notaries and all sorts of things that keep us busy throughout the day, helping folks around the Commonwealth. And one of the really important things that we do, you all know Tracy, you hear from her frequently, you hopefully get her newsletters and emails and social media updates. Tracy is leading an awesome team of outreach representatives. We've got, in addition to Tracy, who serves as our Deputy Secretary of the Commonwealth and the Director of African Outreach, Sean Soares, who's joining us, is also Special Assistant for Board Appointments, but also our Director of AAPI Outreach. We have a Director of Latino Outreach, Director of LGBTQ Outreach, and a Director of Women's Outreach. And Tracy is leading that charge and making sure that our team is really coordinating closely with the governor's office to get the word out. And we really appreciate her and the whole team and everything that they're doing. We've really ramped that up under Governor Northam's administration to make sure that that we are reaching out to the community and serving in a very proactive way. And I'm so proud of the team. Tonight's call is also important because I want to go back to board appointments now and really talk about the importance of representation. This is at the heart of what we do because it's not just our job to fill these board seats. We want to make sure that we're filling them in a meaningful way and that all of it is being represented. Governor Northam always says he doesn't care who you are or where you're from. We want to build a better Virginia for everybody. And so that's really the importance of what we do. We want to make sure that our boards look like Virginia, right? And that has not always been the case. And I think it's important how, we've got Dr. Cheryl Ivey Green, who represents the African American Advisory Board. They're doing amazing work. I tell our friends on the advisory boards all the time, I think the Latino Advisory Board can recite my speech by heart by saying, I don't want your friends just to serve on the Latino Advisory Board. I need your voices on all of the boards. We need your voices representing your community and your perspectives on healthcare boards and education boards and public safety boards. So it's so important to make sure that our boards are well represented. We can't do that without you all knowing that these are opportunities, without you applying and letting us know that you're willing to serve. And that's why tonight's call is so important. I love Tracy's subtitle on this next bullet point, the evolution of our office from Keeper of the Seal to Advancing Social Justice. It's so perfect. Tracy and I have been doing this together for not just Governor Northam's administration, but Governor McAuliffe's administration as well. It's been so wonderful to partner with her and team up and really evolve our office. So we are the keeper of the seals. You can't use that state seal unless you get permission from our office. I attest the governor's signature. Really lots of not very exciting, but very important work. But we have really grown and evolved the office. And I think Tracy and I both like to think of it in some ways as the Office of Civic Engagement, the Office of Social Justice, the Office of Community Engagement, because we really do so much to make sure that, again, that representation, these state boards, as you're going to hear in a few minutes, they're not just board seats, they're really affecting each of our lives every day across Virginia. And so that's so important in so many different ways. So again, that representation, it comes back into everything that we do. And so with that, you're going to hear more from me about boards and my passion for them and making sure we find good spots for all of you on the call tonight. But with that, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Tracy and to Sean, who's going to start diving in on some of these boards.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Secretary Thomason, for speaking with us about just providing us with an overview of the office, talking about the evolution of the work that we do, and then also stressing the importance of representation on our boards and commissions. Sean, I'm now going to turn it over to you. We'd love for you to talk a little bit about the department, the approximate number of state boards and commissions, the number of annual appointments we make, and then the types of boards. And as you do so, feel free to tell us a little bit about yourself also.
Sure, and thank you again, Tracy, for doing this event and for having me on to talk about some of the work that we do. So in board appointments, we have a little over 300 boards and commissions in Virginia that the governor can make appointments to, with more being added every year after the General Assembly session. On average, the governor will make roughly 700 to 900 appointments each year. We often get asked what the timeline is to apply and be selected, and we accept applications on a rolling basis, but most terms will end June 30th of every year, with new terms beginning July 1st. So between December and May is an ideal time to apply, but we do make appointments year-round, and sometimes members will either need to step down for personal reasons or and giving that opportunity for someone else to serve. So, so as soon as someone tells me that they're interested in board service, I tell them to submit their application right away so that we have it in our system so we can consider them. So let's dive into some of the types of boards that we have. Each board and commission can be placed into one of three categories: advisory, supervisory, and policy boards. An advisory board or commission or council serves as the formal liaison between the agency and the public, ensuring that the agency understands and responds to public concerns and that the activities of the agency are communicated to the public. Advisory boards provide advice and counsel to an executive branch of agency, and some of these boards can include constituency boards such as the African American Advisory Board or the Asian Advisory Board. Or another example would be the Advisory Committee on Juvenile Justice that advises the Department of Criminal Justice Services on matters related to the prevention and treatment of juvenile delinquency. The other type of board is a supervisory board, which is responsible for agency operations, including approval of appropriations requests. Supervisory boards appoint the agency director. The board ensures that the agency director complies with all board and statutory derivatives. And these boards include all the Board of Visitors for our public colleges and universities, the Board of Game and Inland Fisheries, the Virginia College Savings Board, and much more. Lastly, the policy boards are specifically charged by statute to promulgate public policies or regulations. These boards may also be charged by statute with adjudicating violations of those policies or regulations. These boards can include the State Board of Health, the Board of Contractors, barbers and cosmetology, or any profession that requires a license to perform that job. These boards often have seats reserved for members of the general public or individuals that are not associated with that industry to give that public perspective on the board. So one of the big questions is who can serve on these boards, and the answer is each board is unique. Some boards have certain requirements, some boards have term limits, and some boards meet more frequently than others. So the answer is who can serve on a board really just depends on the board and that board seat, and we consider background involvement in areas of interest and building a Commonwealth that works better for all people, no matter who they are and where they live.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that overview, Sean. I don't know about anyone else, but it's always helpful, I think, to really understand the types of boards and take a look at them in categories. And so hopefully you all took some screenshots of this one, but again, advisory, supervisory, and policy. Later in the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about board formation and the newly formed boards as well. And so we're going to transition back to Secretary Thomason to talk about both of those, as well as how do you determine you're fit to serve? How do you search for opportunities? And then how do you go about actually submitting an application?
Excellent. Thank you. Tracy got to run these slides for me because I'll ramble on in all sorts of different directions if she doesn't put bullet points up for me. But this is great. So Sean gave you a great overview of the types of different boards. Most of those boards are authorized in the Virginia Code. So the General Assembly is passing legislation to establish those boards. And so that, we hear from a lot of people throughout the year that say, how come there's not a board on X, Y, and Z? That's going to be decided by the General Assembly. And we see that, as Sean mentioned, every year, some years more than others. Last year was a big year for new boards. The General Assembly got together and they created a ton of them, it felt like, at least from Sean and my perspective, because we had to find people to serve on all of those boards. But so that's how most of the time, 99.9% of boards are being created by legislation. Every once in a while, the governor is forming boards through executive action. So there are special circumstances that warrant an executive order where we're creating a new board. I think about the work that our office did over the last 2 years on the 2020 census. The governor created the Virginia Complete Count Commission. I know probably some of you all on the phone helped participate in that. Our dear friend Gil Bland, Gayleen Knoyton, others from around Virginia who served on that board. There are other boards, the African American Education Commission. I butchered the name of that. It had more words, but so there are some boards that are being created through executive order. Tracy's put up a number of new boards that got created during the 2020 session, and these or 2019 session as well. Some really important, impactful boards. As I said, we're not always super excited when new boards are formed from my workload perspective, but so many important things, and really thrilled with some of these and the meaningful work that they're going to do over the next few years, namely, especially the Virginia African American Advisory Board. This is one that Delegate Lamont Bagby carried this legislation. Dr. Cheryl Ivey Green, our brand new chair of that board, got elected to chair last week, and you're gonna hear from her in a little bit about her experience. We've got things like the Board for Art Therapy, the Spirits Board. There was a wine board, but now there's a Spirits Board. It's a growing industry in Virginia. We want to make sure that we're doing right and having good regulations there. There's the New Americans Advisory Board. This is a board that exists under the Department of Social Services in close collaboration with our office, Chief Diversity Officer, Dr. Underwood's office, working on issues affecting new Americans, immigrants who are coming to Virginia, and how are we supporting those individuals in that community. There's the Commission to Study Slavery and Subsequent de jure and de facto Economic Discrimination. That one, we should have appointments being announced to that very, very soon, possibly Friday, which we're really excited about. Some great folks serving on that. Delegate McQuinn spearheaded that through legislation last year. American Revolution is looking at the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, and the Environmental Justice Advisory Council. This is a board that actually was created with executive order by the governor, and then is so important that the General Assembly decided to codify that and make it an ongoing, lasting commission. So these are the types of boards that you can see, those needs that arise, that the General Assembly and the legislative branch is saying, hey, you know what, this is a really pressing issue that hasn't been addressed before. We need to make sure that we are dedicating folks to look at this and make some recommendations and make sure that we're advancing the ball down the road. So, so that's a little bit about how boards get formed. Now, understanding the process of how we appoint people to serve on those boards. Again, as Sean said, we're making 700 to 900 appointments a year. We can't put you on a board unless we know you're out there and interested. So a big part of the process is just putting in an application. I tell people all the time, don't overthink this. Don't decide, do I really want to serve? Do I have time for this? Take the plunge, fill out an application. It will take you 10 minutes to fill it out. And it's so important. And it might be a little while before we contact you. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But just because you put in your application today does not mean we're going to call you tomorrow with the perfect fit. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time. I often say that that making board appointments is like putting a puzzle piece together. The governor and our team and our administration is thinking about that big picture and what we want the big picture to look like. How are we making sure that we're making good decisions for Virginians, that we've got all of our communities represented, that we've got people in these positions to help our agencies govern and to serve the people of the Commonwealth. And so we've got to think about that big picture, and we've got to find those puzzle pieces so we can have well-represented boards. And that's what we're doing on the back end. You can help by figuring out how you fit in and where you might want to serve. So we'll make sure that you've got our website, which I think was on the flyer, and we'll drop in the chat as well. And I'm sure Tracy will have it on a slide as well. But going to our website and making sure that you're looking at those vacancies, that you're thinking about what it means to serve, thinking about those advisory, policy, regulatory boards. And then I always tell people, think broadly when you look at these opportunities. There are a lot of opportunities to serve, over 300 boards spread out across state government. And, you know, I talk to a lot of people who say, I'm really passionate about education. I'm really passionate about economic development. And we applaud that, and it's wonderful. You might not find a board that is exactly what you want or that fits your exact background. Think broadly, though. Look at some of those other opportunities that you might not have considered. You know, people serve for all different reasons, either because they're passionate about one particular subject or you just want to serve. You know, there's also that added benefit of boosting your resume, making some new connections, meeting new people. There's lots of reasons to get involved. And so when you look at those, I think we'll talk a little bit more about some of these opportunities when we look at some of those specific seats. There are boards where you might say, I don't really know anything about that area. I'm not a licensed, I'm not a licensed dentist. I'm not a dental hygienist. But you know what we need on the Board of Dentistry? Citizen members. And those are people who aren't involved in those professions and don't work in a dentist office and so those are opportunities too, especially on our regulatory boards where we're looking for people outside of the profession. So there's a lot of really interesting opportunities to serve that you might not consider at first glance. So when you're searching for those opportunities, understand the purpose of the board. We've revamped our website in the last year or two to really give more information on that vacancy list. You can click on the board. You can see their mission and purpose. You can see some of their meeting schedules, what agencies they work with. So do a little bit of homework. We try to make it easy and put it all on our website for you, link to those board websites. Do a little bit of homework and see what might be interesting. Look at that current list of appointees and their terms of service, all of that again on the website. But again, as Sean said, don't, we've got a vacancy list of all those vacancies that will come up this year. If there's a board that you feel so strongly about serving on and there's not a vacancy this year, still put it on your application as something that you're interested in. You can select up to 4 boards. You never know when somebody might step down or resign and we need somebody to serve on that board. We want to know that you're interested in it if it's something that you feel passionate about. Again, all this information, there's a blue book on our website that gives you a lot of great information. You can explore all of these things at commonwealth.virginia.gov.
Thank you so much, Secretary Thomason. I'm going to jump in if that's okay. Perfect. And what I want to talk about, I really want to pick up where the Secretary left off with submitting your application, opportunities, determining if you're the right fit. But now let's talk about actual board seat kind of specifications, right? So we know that there's an opportunity for everyone to serve, but remember, most boards are created through legislation, meaning that our office, we don't make those requirements for the boards. Our responsibility is simply to make the appointments, but we have to do so by following the law or by following the statute. Right, so we can't give you a board seat or put you in a board seat if you don't meet the actual requirements of those particular seats. And so what we want to do right now is I just want to highlight a few vacancies, and I'm going to bring Sean back into the conversation so that we can talk in real time about some of these seat requirements for some of the boards that we're going to highlight this evening. And again, we hope you're taking notes. We are actively searching for individuals to serve on these boards that we're highlighting. The first board is going to be the Task Force on Services for Survivors of Sexual Assault. Sean, can you jump in and tell us a little bit about the seats that we're looking for? I know you and I had discussed this previously. We're looking for some healthcare professionals. What type of healthcare professionals are we looking for this particular board?
Yep. So for this particular board, we are looking for reps from a hospital, representatives from organizations that advocate for children or advocate for sexual assault survivors, pediatricians, nurses, and I think a physician as well.
Fantastic. That's really helpful. Again, hopefully you all are taking notes. So when you first looked at this title, Task Force on Services for Survivors of Sexual Assault, you may not have thought that we were looking for a hospital representative, right? You were probably thinking that it was only going to be advocates. And yes, we're looking for advocates, but we're also looking for professionals that may have worked with victims or may have worked with survivors, right? And so let's move forward. We also have the Board of Long-Term Care Administrators and the Maternal Mortality Review Team. So Sean, what type of vacancies do we currently have on these two boards?
Currently for the Board of Long-Term Care Administrators, we are looking for someone who is either a resident of or knows a family member who is a resident of a long-term care facility. That's the plain requirement. And Maternal Mortality Review Team are looking for someone who's on a local EMS team.
Fantastic. That is really helpful. I know we're getting some questions in the chat, so just so you all know, I'm taking note of all of those questions and we'll certainly come back to those. Let's keep going with our board vacancies because we want you all to take notes of where we're currently seeking individuals. Next, we have the Radiation Advisory Board. Sean, I know we're looking for some people that are again in the healthcare industry. Can you talk about specifically what type of person we're looking for?
Yeah, so there's a range of occupations that could apply to this board, but the main requirement is just that you work in the radiation field in some way.
Fantastic. Now we're going to round things out with two additional boards. That's the Board of Medicine, and then there's a separate board. We just put them on the same slide, so be careful there. The Board for People with Disabilities. Now, again, we're kind of staying kind of the healthcare vein this evening, and we wanted you, especially given the pandemic that we're dealing with in the backdrop of tonight's conversation, we wanted to do this to ensure that you saw the type of individual that we're seeking to serve in these different positions. And so, Sean, talk about those last two boards and the type of requirements that we have around those seats.
Sure. So for the Board of Medicine, actually, one of the requirements is to have a physician from every congressional district in Virginia. So as you can imagine, some are a little harder to find than others. And as of right now, we're looking for someone in the 9th Congressional District who's a physician who'd be interested in applying. For the Board of People with Disabilities, we're looking for someone in either the retail or manufacturing industry or a parent of a child who has MAEd.
Thank you so much. So that's a very, very specific seat. And so thank you so much for just giving us a little bit of background on those. You all chat us and let us know if that was helpful so that you can really understand the types of seats, seat requirements that we have and the types of vacancies that we currently have. Now, again, this isn't a comprehensive list, right? This is just a snapshot that we wanted to provide you all. And we also wanted to remind you, we talked about submitting the application, but the steps really are as simple as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And so we want you to actually visit our website. Once you're there, we want you to review that current list of vacancies. I promise we're going to give you the website, but for now, we want you to kind of take some notes, stay in the conversation, but review that current list of vacancies there. We want you to research the boards and commissions. Remember, Secretary Thomason gave you those tips to make sure you know the purpose of the board instead of just blindly applying. We want you to go ahead and submit your application. Don't wait. Remember, we accept them on a rolling basis with most boards terms ending June 30th and new terms starting July 1. The fourth step, if you are selected to serve, we're going to proactively contact you. Now, here's a little disclaimer. We do get a good number of people to apply. We don't have the capacity, unfortunately, because of how our system is built, to contact everyone who isn't selected. But know that once you're in the system, we promise we will always consider you. So please do keep that in mind. And then lastly, your oath is administered and you begin service. Now, from then on, we kind of have to say our goodbyes because you're going to be working directly with the board administrator and you're going to be working directly typically with a state agency or a secretariat. So remember that we still care about you deeply, but once we make the appointment, our responsibilities and that connection kind of ends and we hand you over to our colleagues within that agency. Now, what we want to do now, we're going to transition a bit. So again, thank you, Secretary Thomason. Thank you so much, Sean, for that very, very helpful information. We're getting lots of questions and comments. Just as a little reminder, we've had a number of people to join us since we first started. Bear in mind that you all can't see the entire attendee list, but we promise you're not alone. There are 140 people that are engaging in tonight's discussion. And so again, you are not alone, but because of how we have the platform set up, we want to make sure that we have privacy. We also want to make sure that we're able to facilitate this in a very efficient and effective manner. So keep those questions and those comments coming, and we promise we're going to get to them. What we're going to do now is transition to our panel discussion. And so during this portion, we invite Secretary Thomason and Sean to stay in the conversation with us. But we're going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. I'm going to stop sharing my screen temporarily. As we transition, I want to remind you all that you have the opportunity to change the view on your screen as you see fit. So if you hover in the upper right-hand corner over the word layout, you can change your screen to a grid view, a stage view, or you can bring it into focus. And again, this is on your device. You're free to change that as you see fit. I am currently looking at the presentation in a grid view right now so that I can see all of our panelists. So really quickly, I'm going to check to see if our final panelist has been able to join us. She's doing a little double duty this evening. So give me just one moment. All right, she has in fact been able to join us. So we're going to go ahead and get her connected. As we are elevating her and getting her connected, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first two panelists. First, we are joined by Dr. Cheryl Ivey Green. Dr. Ivey Green serves as the new elected chair of the Virginia African American Advisory Board, and she's also served in other capacities, both within state government as well as on state boards and commissions. And so, Dr. Ivey Green, welcome.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Next, we are joined by Mr. Ryant Washington. Ryant serves formerly as a sheriff. And so don't mess with him. He also previously served as the Deputy Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security. So one of my colleagues and friends, I consider all of our panelists friends this evening. But thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
Thank you. Welcome you as well.
Thank you. And then lastly, Councilwoman Cydny Neville. I will forever refer to you as Councilwoman. So Councilwoman Neville is joining us from the wonderful town of Dumfries, where we have lots of friends serving in various capacities. Councilwoman Neville, I'm just going to embellish for a moment, is a graduate of the Virginia State University and has just done tremendous work in the community to include kind of revamping a Virginia Black Lifestyle magazine. And so I wanted to be sure to mention that this evening. So welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So we're going to jump into the questions. And just so everyone knows that's joining us, keep your questions coming. We can certainly see them. I have a few questions for the panelists, and then we're going to turn things over to you all. So we're going to jump in. This first question is for all of our panelists. We're going to go in order of introductions, and it's each of you currently serves or has served on a statewide board or commission. In your own words, tell us what made you pursue service and where have you or are you currently serving? And so we'll start with you, Dr. Ivey Green.
Well, good evening, and I want to thank you, Secretary DeShazer, Deputy Secretary DeShazer, for having me tonight. it's very interesting, when you are serving or working in an area you are passionate about, sometimes a board appointment finds you. My first board appointment was with the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. And I found myself daily working with persons with mental health issues who had been in jail. And I wanted to work in that jail recidivism area. And one day just got a call that to see if I would be interested in serving. I ended up serving 2 terms because I loved it so much and continued to work in the mental health field. So while applying for boards is great, sometimes you just have to go to work. I am currently serving on the African American Advisory Board, and likewise, it found me because of all the work that I do in the community. So, it pays to serve. And I have to go Bible because to whom much is given, much is required. So much is required of me to give back to the community. And because I have that passion for underserved communities, the African American Advisory Board was really a perfect fit for me. And listen, don't join if you don't want to go to work, because the Secretary of the Commonwealth will put you to work. Thank you, Tracy.
Absolutely. I'm going to jump in really quickly to share that I think we have asked or made maybe kind of work with Dr. Ivey Green for 3 different commitments this week in service and support of Virginia's Black community. So we do put you to work. Perfect. So Ryan, do you want to jump in on that same question?
I will certainly echo what Dr. Green stated, but I will say, and I'm going to echo it because it's everything she said I was about to say about the secretary and yourself. They will work you, trust me. But it's all in good for the Commonwealth. And I'll tell you, after serving approximately 30 years in local and state government, for me, and now serving on a board, the Charitable Gaming Board, as a citizen, most of my boards over the years, and I've served on countless numbers of them, serve based on my profession. As Dr. Green said, you get called on based on what you do day in and day out in your livelihood. And so I've served on various types of boards in my professional capacity, but having the opportunity to serve on a board as a citizen, it didn't change much. It's no more than I don't have to go to office every day. But it's rewarding because for me, it gives me the opportunity to serve on a board that actually was not in my daily profession. So it challenged me to use my experience and my professional background in a way that I probably wouldn't have if I hadn't served as a citizen. So I encourage you that it's rewarding for one personally, but it's also rewarding, I think, to bring to the table to the citizens your professional expertise that you can bring, because many times you're going to find yourself in a situation where that particular board may be discussing a particular subject matter that you can share with other board members as well as the attendees your level of expertise.
That's actually really helpful perspective too. So thank you for sharing that and attesting to Dr. Ivey Green's comment that we will put you to work. And so wonderful. So Councilwoman Neville, you've also had the opportunity to serve. And so share with us your experience.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I echo the sentiments of who shared their perceptions before me. And I just go back to Shirley Chisholm. So Shirley said that service is the rent that you pay for a room on this earth. So I just always believe in serving and just stepping up, filling the gap, doing whatever I can to make my Commonwealth of Virginia or my local community, Main Street, USA, a little better than it was before. So I'm just here to serve. And so going back, I think at the time, I just signed up. I just wanted to be placed anywhere. And, you got to be careful. I'm going to go back to what Dr. Green said, because, God always says, too, that be careful what you ask for, because you're going to get it. And you need to be ready when it comes back to you. Be braced for those blessings, right? When we put things in the atmosphere. So I was excited to be placed with the State Historical Records Advisory Board. And it's important to speak to that at this time because Virginia is full of rich culture and history, and all that needs to be documented and preserved. And that is what we do. And I got to congratulate our new additions to the board that were mentioned in that press release that was shared just a few days ago. And shout out to our 11-member board. But doing that work is very important. And I think the events of last year, when we talk about monuments and things of that nature, just preserving the culture, the history, making it accessible to the people, I believe that's something that has come under everyone's purview. And having worked on grants, and that's what we do. We go through, we work with the national board, and there are lots of funding opportunities that are available. This is a huge part of the board's duties, to make that funding available and go through and screen those applications to preserve our historical records. So it is a pleasure to serve.
Cindy, thank you so much. Tracy just called me on the other line and her computer shut down. So she was afraid the whole webinar shut down, but we're good. I think everybody's good to go.
Yes.
Thank you.
They're awkward silence. I'm like, I'm done.
I know. I was talking to her and she's like, jump in. I was like, okay. So here we are. I mean, I think all of you have hit this perfectly, why it's so important and why you should think broadly, right? You are the perfect example, and I think this has happened with all of you, and it's something that we didn't touch on too much. It's really important when you fill out those applications to select those boards that you're interested. But again, having that open mind is really important, because sometimes we play matchmaker. Sometimes we might call you and say, hey, I know you applied for this board over here, but I see that you also have volunteered in this organization, or went to this school, or you've got a license in this field. How about this instead? And we have found some really good placements, and people have been willing to have an open mind. So that's so important. Is there anything, listen, y'all, Tracy is always better at me than moderating a conversation. That's why she does it. But can you share maybe something that's been kind of most surprising in your service, or something that's really just been a meaningful experience so far that you really felt like you could jump in and you made a difference?
Well, I do want to say, first of all, I love the African American Advisory Board. It's just such a good fit for me. But when I think about being asked to join the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services, I had no mental health experience. And have really become an advocate for mental health since that time, and currently serving on Richmond Behavioral Health as a result of the work I did with the state, and will probably the rest of my life be an advocate for those with mental health challenges. And so I'm grateful for new opportunities and new experiences, and then the great connections with the other 20 people that I'm serving with. It's awesome.
It is such a good group, and you feel almost like you're with family when we go to those African American Advisory Board meetings. And just even now when it's virtual and we're on Zoom, it's not the same, but really being able to come together and hear those perspectives and those stories. Mr. Washington, my friend who is serving on now 2 boards. What about you? What is there kind of a moment or a experience that you'd like to dive in on?
Yeah, I mean, I think, because if you get out of your bubble, so to speak, anytime you serve on a board that's not in that bubble, you're kind of like, okay, what am I really getting myself into, that uncomfortable zone that you not used to. And so for me, you know, joining the, after you twisted my arm and put and made me join the charitable gaming board, it was kind of convincing to say, yes, I'll do it. However, with that being said, it has been an enjoyable learning experience because, I mean, you know, I knew bingo, played card games here and there all the time, but really didn't know all of the aspects of what charitable gaming dealt with. And yes, it does with raffles and you know, bingo, halls, tournaments, things of that sort. And now we have Texas Hold'em games and tournaments that are legal specific for organizations that are qualified through the Commonwealth. And so learning that aspect has been exciting. I would say that my first meeting, though, was very confusing. I sat there like, I didn't know what an ace of spades was, probably, or how to do bingo anymore. I hadn't done it in so long. But, you know, getting and listening to not only other board members who are very knowledgeable in the area, but listening to other stakeholders and inquiring made me a little bit more inquisitive to do my own research to become more knowledgeable. And so the resources are available. The contacts are available. So I would say to anyone that's interested in getting on a board, again, get outside of that bubble. There's many, many resources and contacts that can help you feel more comfortable in your learning experience. And so I would just encourage that. As you said, I'm on round one, getting to go on round two. The service is enjoyable. It's actually fun. You're doing great work. My colleague mentioned it earlier. It's just fun to be involved, and I think the important thing that for me in here is the opportunity to make a difference, no matter what the board is. You're making a difference, and you know, the old saying is, if you're not in the room, then you can't make a difference. And so when you're in the room, you're at the table, you actually can help get input, make input, and make a difference.
Thank you. Now, for any of you all that know Ryant, there's always fun when he's there. So if you're looking for fun, I'd suggest the Charitable Games Board or the Fire Services Board, because you can serve with Ryant. There will be guaranteed fun. Thank you. Sean, I'm going to put you on deck to ask a question if there's things that you can think of that I've forgotten about or that we want to make sure to highlight. But the next thing I'd love to hear from our panelists, I know a lot of people have questions about, hey, I'm really busy, right? I've got work, I've got my life, I've got my family, I've got board commitments that I'm doing for nonprofits or other community, local governments. How am I going to make this work? Can you all kind of talk about what it looks like for you to serve, that maybe that time commitment or how you find that balance and that time to give? That's a pretty big question. And it looks different for each one of you, because I know all of your boards have different commitments. And so I'd love to hear, you know, maybe from each of you just quickly kind of how that looks for you.
So I'll jump in, Secretary Thomason. So I will say, if someone is interested in applying for a particular board, to do their homework, do your due diligence, look at the link. Usually from all the positions I've seen that were available, you can go back and see the meeting dates. You can go back and see minutes from past meetings. You can see that information just to make sure it does complement your schedule and to make sure that you can actually meet during those times. And I imagine the flexibility has gotten much better now because we're meeting virtually, right? But I did want to take a minute and go back to your last question as well, because there are some highlights from the State Historical Records Advisory Board that I'd like to point out. And these happened before my time, but I just think they're amazing so people understand. Usually when I say I serve on the Strat Board, they're like, what is that? So the types of things that we do, you know, VCU has received to the tune of a little over $160,000 for their archives of the New Dominion. So this is important work, right? The city of Petersburg has received over $8,000 to duplicate negatives for a particular time period for the city of Petersburg. And I want to say it was from 1920s to the 1950s. So that's the important kind of work that we do. And the Library of Virginia has received over $38,000 to restore sound recordings of WRVA radio. So the work is important, and it is a pleasure to serve. Even if Ryant sounds like he's having a lot of fun with his board meetings, but it's all purposeful work, and it is truly a blessing to serve. So yes, to answer that question, I just wanted to highlight a few things there. And I know Historic Dumfries has some projects as well, but go ahead, look at the openings. There's always a link, and see when those meetings are, because hey, sometimes it takes a while to get back. Secretary Thomason, I want to say you all are great matchmakers from all of the experiences I've heard of, including my own. You know, I didn't apply for this particular board, but this is where I was placed, and it works wonderfully with what I have to offer. You know, so when you apply, it may take a while, but you will eventually be matched. So when you apply, do it with the purpose and the intention of being present to do the work that comes along with it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
I was just going to add one note in there that I think is good for folks to know, and that is that most of the boards, you know, well, not most, all of the boards are have public meetings, and with as stated earlier, you know, with the ability to attend those meetings virtually now. I would encourage you, if you kind of on the line about whether you should, you shouldn't, you know, find out when those boards are meeting next, kind of go online, attend one of the meetings, get a feel for really what their discussions are, kind of how the meetings go. I think that'll be very beneficial from a prep standpoint, and kind of give you an idea of whether or not that board is the direction you want to go or not.
And I just want to share that, you know, there is work outside of the quarterly board meetings. There just is. If it's done right, there is work outside of that. But, you know, it's such an enjoyable, fulfilling experience that I don't think you even think twice about how to work it into what you're already doing. And then the other thing I mentioned a little bit earlier are all of the other persons serving with me, all of my other colleagues who make this happen, so that it's not a one-woman show, but you have all of these willing workers who want to be a part of the work that we're doing as we advise the governor. So you know, I haven't found it hard to find balance. I have to pull myself back because I sometimes want to do much more. And you know, you only have a limited amount of time to advance the work that you've been assigned.
We love you for it. At the meeting last week, she was handing out assignments left and right. I loved it. You're doing great work. And I think Councilwoman Neville said this too. You know, we do, again, go back to that website. We try to put that information, and we try to make sure that that we're setting people up for success, right? We want you to be a successful board member, and we want you to know what you're getting into. That's why, again, that research is important, of like, hey, is this a board where I've got the time commitment? Most of the boards, generally speaking, are meeting quarterly in Richmond. Again, pandemic, a little bit different. They're meeting virtually now, but for the most part, in a non-pandemic world, board meetings are happening in Richmond, depending on the board, and they're meeting quarterly. Some boards have a much more rigorous meeting schedule, and that's something that, you know, if you are interested in serving on the board of nursing, God bless you, because it has a really rigorous meeting schedule, right, Sean? You know this is true, because when we are recruiting people for that board, and people say, I really want to serve on this board, and we said, okay, let me just tell you real quick about their meeting schedule, because they meet a lot, and we want to make sure that you're able to take that on and do it. So we try to set you up for success, make sure you know what you're getting into, but do that research. Panelists, you are amazing. I want to keep hearing from you. We've got a lot of questions in the chat, so I think if we could jump to some of those, and you all can help me answer, feel free to dig in on any of these. I'm going to try to get through a couple of them real quick because I can't type and talk at the same time. I'm just not that good. But our full-time state employees, I answered that one. Yes, state employees are eligible. We're not going to put you in on a board, though, that you are working for. That would be a conflict. We're going to, you know, if you're interested in serving in a different agency or under a different issue area, that would be great.
Secretary Thomason, I was going to say,
Oh, it's Tracy.
I know I reemerged. You all probably saw Richmond in my background momentarily. So just wanted to just remind you all that of course, you know, all of these boards are kind of in service to the Commonwealth, but I wanted to jump back in really quickly. Maybe we can do this. So since we do have questions and I've kind of identified some, Sean, on the back end, if you're able to elevate our guests as panelists, maybe we can have them ask their questions in real time. And then maybe we've gotten a few additional ones. And so I'm going to give you a couple of last names, Sean, to kind of look through the chat, and you can make them panelists. And if you all are comfortable, we're happy to have you all elevate your questions directly. So we have last name Clemens, Clemons, first name Misha. And so we'll give Sean a moment to find last name Clemens. And we can make you a panelist. You can jump in with your question. I'm going to give you a few more names. Sean J. Reed, R-E-E-D is the last name. First name has the initial J. We also have first name, initial J, last name Jesse, J-E-E-S-E. And thank you all so much for joining us. We know we're getting you elevated. Last name Anderson, first name Zakia, or first initial is a Z. All right, so Z Anderson, J Reed, J Jesse, M Clemens. And so I know we have a number of people that have joined us. And so we're happy to go ahead and hear your questions directly. So maybe let's do this. Let's start with Z Anderson. If you've joined us, do you want to go ahead and jump in with your question? Okay, we're not there yet, so we're going to go down the list. And so J Reed, if you wanted to go ahead and jump in with your question, feel free.
I think they might have added the wrong person. My question was already answered in the text.
Okay, fantastic. That's okay. Do you mind sharing it with the entire group if you're open to that? Because your question may be the same as someone else's.
It was rather specific when they were talking about the services for survivors of sexual assault. I was just curious if there were mental health professionals included on that board, and it doesn't look like specifically there is, but
yeah.
Thank you.
Of course, and thank you for being comfortable with sharing that question. The question was around mental health professionals. And so while you may not see a mental health professional on one board, you may see mental health professionals on another board. And again, we encourage you to look at the very specific charge. There are some boards where you may think it makes sense to have, you know, a certain profession. And we, in many cases, will probably agree. But once you look at the charge, you see that that charge is a little different than what you may have anticipated based on the name of the board. So
Tracy, before you jump into the next question, I wanted to make a point there too, that on our vacancy list on the website, it's also keyword searchable. I'm a little reluctant to tell you that because I've told you to think broadly and look at the whole list, but you can type in, you know, mental health or law enforcement or public safety, or, you know, you can type in some different words and see if something pops up. But again, don't limit yourself to that, but you could start your search that way for areas that you're particularly interested in or fields that you're licensed in. You're going to see a lot of those board seats that the requirements are going to say member of the general public. That means that there is not a specific legal criteria for that seat, that there's that you know, there might be some specific criteria that we're looking for, but nothing that's required by law. Any of those seats where there's a seat description that says, you know, a cosmetologist who lives in the 9th district, that person needs to be a cosmetologist that lives in the 9th congressional district. Some of our seats are that specific, but many of them are members of the general public that are open to anybody.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you for your feedback too. We really appreciate that. So Sean, I know we've had a few other people join us. And so Jennifer, Jesse, did you want to jump in with your question?
Hi, Tracy. How are you?
Hi, friend. Hi, Hokie.
I just had a question because I didn't realize that boards were even open, because I was told like a long time ago that boards were just kind of like favors, and, you know, like it's like you had to know people and things like that, especially for, you know, like the boards for university and higher education. So I'm not sure if like that's a question or whatever, but I was just told like you have to kind of just be connected, and it's not really application based, and like somebody might ask you for an application, but it's kind of already decided behind the scenes.
Can I jump in, Tracy, and then I'll let you answer that question also, or if any of our panelists want to answer that as well. I'd say, no, nothing could be further from the truth. I used to start some of my speeches by saying, you know, I think people have a lot of times historically looked at these appointments like political patronage. And then I'd say, gosh, my job would be so much easier if that were true, right? If I could go down the list of donors and say, you're going to serve on a board and you're going to serve on a board. One, I don't think that's good state government, and neither does the governor. And that's not what any of this is all about. I think our team is so great because we really do believe in good government. We want to create good boards the people, and so you don't have to be connected, and that's why we do calls like this and invite hundreds of people to be on them so that everybody can know about these opportunities and know that there's lots of opportunities, and you don't have to be connected. You don't have to have made a donation to politicians before. You don't have to know Tracy, but I mean, certainly if you know Tracy, that helps, but you don't have to know anybody. You don't have to have given any money. And I think if you look at the boards that they speak for themselves in that regards, right? We don't know personally all of the people that we put on our boards. Sean, are sitting down every week and we're looking at resumes and we're looking at references and we're trying to find who's a good fit. And so that's a really great question, and I'm so glad that you elevated it. And that's exactly why we're having this call, so we can make sure that, you know, we'd encourage you all to take that website, share it with your friends and family and colleagues, and let them know that there's great opportunities to serve and they're open to everybody.
And can I ask one follow-up? So one of the things that I advocate for is student participation on things. So are there boards that are open to people who are 18 or below 18 who are currently students as well?
That's an excellent question. So I'll jump in on that one if it's okay, Secretary Thomason. So there are some opportunities to serve, but I think before I answer the question directly, I'm going to say you have to bear in mind kind of some of the requirements for board service. Typically, board terms are 3 to 4 years. Typically, the board's person, when we're not in a pandemic, typically they meet in Richmond, meaning individuals have to travel to Richmond. Now, some boards will rotate their meetings around the Commonwealth, and given that we're in a pandemic, we're convening in this virtual setting. But certainly once we get through this pandemic, we'll certainly be back in person, right? And so, but there are some boards that have specific seat requirements. The first one that comes to mind is always the board for, I believe, juvenile justice services. I believe that one in particular has a requirement where the individual has to be, I believe, under the age of 24. And then you can also look to an example with our Virginia African American Advisory Board. While there is not a specific seat requirement, we intentionally appointed a young woman to serve. And so Ziana Bryant is a second year, I believe, student at the University of, and she's serving. She's been serving since she actually, before she even got to UVA. She was appointed to serve on the board, and so while still a teenager. So certainly opportunities. The challenge that we have in appointing younger people is that they may not necessarily have the bandwidth or have the capacity or the means to serve at this moment, but certain opportunities. Great question. Wonderful. So what we're going to do, of course, you're very welcome. So Sean, I know we've elevated quite a few people. We can go ahead and remove them from being panelists. You can kind of push them back down into our attendee list. We don't want to put people on the spot to stay with us as panelists for too long. We have a couple of questions that Secretary Thomason has already addressed in the chat as well as in the Q&A. But we just want to pause for a moment and see if there are any outstanding questions. As we do that, there are 2 additional people that I want to try to elevate their questions. One, Sean, the last name is, whenever you're ready for it, it's Eberhard or Eberhard, E-B-E-R-H-A-R-T. First initial is an R. We're also joined by African American Advisory Board member Eduardo Lopez, who's asked quite a few questions in the chat, questions from others that he just wanted to make sure he got accurate answers for. And so let's see. Wonderful. So Eduardo, if you're there and you wanted to elevate those questions to the group, you're more than welcome to do that. So we'll give you a moment. Go ahead.
Sure. Sure. Hello, everybody. This is Eduardo. So there were only two main questions that I had that were asked to me, actually. The first one was recently asked and answered. It was the question about whether um, all the meetings take place in the city of Richmond and do board members have to travel there? And that was answered pretty thoroughly. The second one was answered in the Q&A section, and that was whether international or former international students can serve on Board of Visitors positions at different universities, specifically at Old Dominion University.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for those questions. We really appreciate them. We know we have a few more, and so Sean, if you see any that I haven't seen in the chat, I'm switching between the chat and the Q&A. Feel free to elevate people so that we can have them ask their questions directly.
I see one in the chat, Sean, that you could elevate from Miss Knock, N-O-C-K.
Hi there. Thank you all for taking the time. Did want to ask, I know this was kind of covered, I think, by Jesse's question, but did want to ask if there were opportunities for people who are under the age of 30 to be seriously considered for board appointments. I know for myself, I graduated from the University of Virginia about 2 years ago, and my resume wouldn't be as extensive as someone who, you know, has been in their career for like 20 to 30 years, right? But I'm definitely interested in public service.
Thank you. And the reason, thank you so much. And the reason I wanted you to ask that question was so we could specifically talk about one of the things that we talk about when we say representation matters and when we say how much we push diversity in our office is we mean that in so many ways. Right? We're not just looking for racial diversity and gender diversity, but age diversity is critically important. And Tracy addressed this when she talked about Ziana Bryant being appointed to the African American Advisory Board. But Sean can tell you as well, we look at this on all of our boards where we say, hey, you know what? We have we're noticing a trend in this demographic, right? Like there's a lot of old guys on this board, or maybe there's a lot of young 20-somethings on this board, right? Sorry, Ryant.
Don't let the goatee fool you.
And so, but that is something that we do really try to pay attention to, is making sure there's that age diversity, that there's geographic diversity, right? You know, we do the same thing with, hey, this board is really Nova heavy, or real, you know, and I feel like for all those people in Hampton Roads, we are always looking for more people in Hampton Roads, it seems, and Southwest and Southside and the Valley and Charlottesville, but really looking for geographic diversity. Ryant lives in Fluvanna, and I am all the time calling him and asking for his friends in Central Virginia to put in applications. And so all of those things, right? That's when we talk about that big picture and diversity. Age diversity is really important too. So you're right. There's not going to be as many opportunities, right? We want there to be a balance. We want there to be people who have kind of that robust professional experience, but we also want to give an opportunity and lift up those voices that are younger and have a different perspective on the world, because that opinion is really valuable as well in that perspective. So thank you for asking that question.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So we have, I think, time for maybe 2 more questions, and then we'll go ahead and get things closed out. And so, Sean, if you can elevate last name Jones, first initial T, I believe it's Tracy, and then last name Woolen, W-O-O-L-E-N. So those 2 questions, and then we're going to close out, and we want to share with you all just a few tips. An excellent question. If we didn't get to you, I see a few people have already started emailing me, and so I promise to get to your questions. So Tracy, did you want to jump in with yours?
Sure. I had another question that was already answered earlier, but my subsequent question is, when you are selected as a member of a board, will it be that board that provides you with board training, or are there other opportunities for board training?
That's a really good question, and I particularly appreciate that, because oftentimes you're appointed to serve and then you just kind of start and you jump right in, right? And so now remember, our office makes the appointments, but unfortunately we don't train the board members to serve. And so what happens is each board is set up a little differently. And so typically that board is immediately going to be connected to their board administrator. And most boards will have a board orientation. I think a really good example is probably the boards of visitors. And Secretary Thomason is intimately involved in this process each year, but there's a full orientation for individuals that are going to be serving on those boards of visitors in service to our colleges and universities. And the reason that they go through that rigorous orientation is because, I mean, that's serious business, right? So kind of managing all of those operations for our public colleges and universities, those institutions. So to answer the question, while we don't do the training in our office, most boards will have a board orientation facilitated by that board administrator or that state agency. Wonderful.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. And Tracy, I sure do like how you spell your name.
I know.
Perfect. All right. So I think we had one more question. So Deborah, did you want to jump in with your question?
Absolutely. Can everyone hear me and see me?
We can.
Okay, fantastic. Just 2 questions. I'll keep it quick. So I submitted my application in November of last year. I understand that things take time. So I was wondering if I should resubmit. In addition, I have a couple of more certifications that I'd like to include in my application. So how can I go about doing that? Second question is, or maybe that's the third, I'm not sure. But online, it looks like the list was updated in November of last year. How often is the list updated?
That's a great question. So Secretary Thomason, did you want to take the latter question? And then Sean, did you want to jump in on those first sets of questions?
I do. Great question, Deborah. I will tell you that this week has gone by too fast. Yesterday, I thought, ooh, we should update the vacancy list before this call tomorrow night. And 5 minutes before the call, I thought, ooh, we didn't update the vacancy list. So look for that to be updated this week. It does currently have listed all of the 2021 appointments. So what we'll do, generally there won't be new appointments added to that unless, again, somebody resigns or moves and is no longer serving on the board. Those will be few and far between that things get added to that list. But what we try to do is about once a month or so to update that list and take off things that have been filled. So that way you're not looking at opportunities that we've just appointed. You may have, every Friday afternoon, we put out a press release from the governor's office announcing all of the appointments. Last week was a big week. I think this week we're going to have another big case. Typically, this is a slower time of year, but we have been on a roll making some appointments in the off season. And so we do need, we are overdue for an update. That should be posted this week. And again, it'll have a few less opportunities, but again, don't let that stop you from applying for those boards because you never know when a vacancy is going to come up. And so we want to know your interest too, because we might say, oh, look, they applied for the seat on the Department of Behavioral Health Services board. We don't have a seat over there, but we've got a similar board that they didn't apply for where they might be a good fit. And so, don't let that vacancy list stop you from expressing what your interests are.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Secretary Thomason. And thank you for all of the people that are sending me text and emails and LinkedIn requests and messages. I'm getting all sorts of notifications out here, but we certainly welcome it and appreciate it. As we close things out, we're going to ask all of our panelists to go ahead and mute yourselves, and all of our guests that have asked questions. We're out of time for questions, but Deborah, feel free to drop it in the chat for us or shoot us a message directly. But what I want to do is, again, just thank our panelists for taking the time to join us this evening. Not only do they give up their time, they also give, of their talents to the boards. And so we really just want to thank them for their service to the Commonwealth. And you probably heard that many of them not only serve on boards, they're serving in local government, in various capacities. They're serving through ministry. And so we cannot thank you enough for your time and your talent that you share with us. We really do appreciate it. To everyone that participated this evening, we really appreciate you participating. We really appreciate your questions. I know that one of our final questions, and this is actually one of our top 10s as well that I want to leave you with. One of our final questions was around, what happens if I've already applied and submitted an application, and I want to update it. Well, first I'll share, the first thing you need to know is that you can contact us directly. You don't have to submit a new application. If you just reach out to us, we can get everything updated on the back end for you. That's actually preferable. instead of just constantly putting new applications in the system. A couple of other things that we want you to know, again, these are our top 10s that we want to leave you with. Service opportunities are open and available, so anyone can apply to serve. Most boards do meet quarterly and in Richmond, although several boards rotate their meetings and convene in various parts of the state. So just keep that in mind when you're applying to serve. We're virtual right now, but we will not always be in this sort of platform. And there are actually open meeting laws and rules that we have to follow to ensure that our operations are actually transparent and accessible. Number 3, the terms for boards and commissions are, the terms board and commission are typically used interchangeably, and actual board names are going to vary by purpose. And so you'll hear us say board, commission, task force. The terms really are used interchangeably, and it's going to depend on the purpose of the board, what the actual name of the board will be. Number 4, there are several types of boards, again, to include advisory, supervisory, policy, and we even talked about some of those executive order boards or boards that are formed through executive action, typically only stood up for about 1 year. Legally, that's how long we're able to stand them up. And then don't forget that the legislative branch also has a couple of boards. We wanted to remind you that as far as the different boards are concerned, the Office of the Secretary of the Commonwealth, we only oversee the appointments process for those 3 types that we outlined: advisory, supervisory, and policy. So we can't help you with the board for redistricting, right? So that's not under our purview, even though I know a lot of interest was in that board. So just keep that in mind. Number 5, if you are selected to serve, your appointment is considered a gubernatorial appointment, meaning you have been appointed to serve by the governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And we will actually send you an appointments certificate to commemorate your appointment. Number 6, most appointees are not compensated for board service, although we sincerely appreciate your time. And so we do just want to keep that in mind. There are some boards where there is compensation, but again, there are very few boards. Those boards oftentimes are working in a full-time capacity. Number 7, most board terms are 3 to 4 years, and individuals selected to serve are often eligible for reappointment, but not always. So please read the fine print. Next, we'll share with you that number 8 rather, many board seats have specific requirements outlined in law or statute. Number 9, supervisory, advisory, and policy boards, again, for which the Office of the Secretary of the Commonwealth makes appointments. They're created by law. They're created by the Virginia General Assembly. We don't create them. We make the appointments to them. And then lastly, to round things out this evening, for the past several years, we've worked to diversify Virginia state boards and commissions, and we've actually measured our progress along the way. Annually, we submit a report to the Virginia General Assembly that actually breaks down our efforts by demographics and includes both race and gender. To date, there are nearly 20% of the people living in the Commonwealth are African American. And to date, in the Northam administration, we have appointed approximately 22% of our appointees are African American. And so we did just want to share that with you all. Again, we sincerely appreciate you taking time with us this evening. We thank you all for your questions and consideration. And we started with a quote by Shirley Chisholm, and we will end with that same quote. And just remembering that service is the rent that we pay. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful evening. Take care.